Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Robert and I'm here today with the December book in the Classics Book Club, and that is Upton Sinclair's novel from 1906, The Jungle. If you haven't read this one, it is in that tradition of muckraking novels. It's set right at the turn of the 20th century, and it covers a period of about 5 years, up till the 1904 elections. And it's set, of course, in Chicago's meatpacking industries and the various businesses that grew up around the meatpacking industries in Chicago. This book is hard to read for a number of reasons. One, it's just so unremittingly bleak. But it's also hard to read because Sinclair's prose is very stiff, very formal, and it goes on and on and on, and there's a lot of detail in there that distracts you from the storyline at times. And a lot of that is not really a concern to Sinclair because he didn't see this as a work of art. This is a piece of pure propaganda in Sinclair's eyes. And rather than just like most muckraking novels, pointing out the faults of something in society with the hope of some correction, Sinclair is clearly using this as an argument against capitalism and for socialism. And so it's a little bit different purpose than what a lot of the novels were from this period. One of the big ideas and one of the big dichotomies in this book is the comparison with capitalism and socialism. It's very clear in the book, right from the beginning, that capitalism for Sinclair is just organized greed. It creates competition that can be ruthless and on every level of industry and society. Workers are having to compete for jobs that are very scarce, which of course drives their wages down and ends up creating some unsafe working conditions because the employers have no motivation to make the conditions safe. So capitalism in Sinclair's book leads to mistrust, exploitation, and endless layers of corruption. It's a form of economic slavery that makes political freedom meaningless. So for Sinclair, socialism eliminates privilege and exploitation because everything is commonly owned and the democratic management of industry is run by the people rather than a handful of owners. So it's looking for a very class-conscious union of wage earners. And Jurgis, the main character who comes from Lithuania right at the turn of the century, he and his family are victimized by capitalism. Low wages, cutbacks at seasonal times of the year, layoffs, illnesses, accidents. If a worker gets weak, they just fire him ruthlessly. All of this is victimized by capitalism. Socialism, though, is what they see as a real hope for the future. And you especially see this in the last 50 or 60 pages of the book, where socialism is the answer in this novel. And it's not even subtle, it's just blatant. There's a theme running through this book of a comparison between freedom and confinement. The workers in Packingtown resemble the animals that they're processing. And it's not a surprise that the title of the novel symbolically is The Jungle. A young boy named Stanislav dies after being locked up in a factory one night. Jurgis is locked up in prison, but later he realizes that the outside is the worst form of prison since it deprives him of food, deprives him of safety, deprives him of warmth. The countryside provides a certain freedom. Jurgis seems to come alive, it says, under the open sky. But for Sinclair, the only real freedom can be provided by socialism. I mentioned the title, The Jungle. Humans are seen as beasts in this book. Animals going to the slaughterhouse represent the human condition. And it's a fact that finally gets revealed to Jurgis by socialism. There's a quotation that says, "He had stood and watched the hog killings and come away congratulating himself that he was not a hog. Now his new acquaintance showed him that a hog was just what he had been." So it's not until he gets introduced to socialism that he recognizes his own part in this human tragedy. Under the capitalist system, people are treated worse than animals. In jail, Jurgis is worried that his family is going to perish, and he's lamenting that they would not even have treated a beast as they treated him, he says. So people in the novel are often compared with animals. Visitors to the sausage factory watch the peace workers' movements, quote, like some wild beast in a menagerie. Jurgis's wife, Ona, her eyes are like those of a hunted animal, and Jurgis reacts to Ona's sexual abuse like a wounded bull. So there are many references throughout this book to humans as animals. Darwin's idea of natural selection, which is often boiled down to survival of the fittest, where the strong survive at the expense of the weak, influenced a lot of the naturalist writers like Sinclair. Packingtown residents are engaged in the struggle for survival among themselves and also against the system. The weak suffer at the hands of the strong through hunger, sickness, and alcoholism. All these things are rampant among the workers. And if there are more workers than needed, the weaker ones just die off, the book says. When Jurgis gets hurt, he injures an arm. He is, quote, at the mercy of every rival, like a wounded animal in the forest. As part of his socialist education, Jurgis is introduced to economic evolution, which is a process where the strong overcome the weak. And he kind of learns that combination, in other words, union organization, is a higher kind of strength that will bring about the workers' triumph over capitalism. So he's slowly becoming a political animal as well as just a beast of burden. There's an idea running throughout this book that's impossible to ignore, and that's the idea of corruption or exploitation. In capitalism, at least as Sinclair has painted it in this book, wealth and power are controlled by a few people, and that power corrupts. You have government health and safety regulations that get bypassed through payoffs to legal and political authorities. The factory bosses abuse and exploit workers, and they buy their silence with threats. If you know you're going to lose your job and your family's going to starve, you put up with a lot. Politicians peddle their influence. It's an army of graft, as the book calls it, and that maintains the power in the hands of a few wealthy business people. The party workers rig elections. They pay people to vote multiple times. They pay people to vote a certain way. So there's corruption from top to bottom throughout this society, and it's just so gloomy reading about the corruption because, of course, we're talking about that in our own society today. There's also in this book a sense of the past. Throughout most of the novel, the past seems preferable to the miseries of the present and the unknowable future. The family is constantly thinking back to their life in the old world and the values they had of sharing and trust and cooperation and respect. And they hate the fact that they see these values being replaced in America by greed and competition and cheating. It's only at the end where Jurgis starts to have some optimism about the future because of his conversion to socialism. This book has its roots in naturalism and 19th century realism. It's focused a lot on the same types of social and economic influences as other writers of the period, but unlike true naturalists, Sinclair wasn't trying to be objective. The jungle belongs to that tradition I mentioned before of muckraking novels, and the narrator's sympathies lie clearly with the workers in this book and against the beef trust magnates. The jungle, as I mentioned before, is different though in that it's not merely a book to point out the abuses to be corrected, but it's seen as a means of spreading socialist propaganda in an effort to change the system under which those abuses are possible. So this is a book that I haven't read in a long time. And I remember it being grim and just heartbreaking. But I came to it with a different set of eyes this time. And from a literary point of view, the book has some problems. There's some stylistic weaknesses. There's a very heavy-handed use of details and statistics and explanations. There's not a whole lot of room for the reader to interpret things. The characters are just puppets, basically, and they're maneuvered from one tragedy to the next and made as pathetic as possible to underline what Sinclair's trying to propose, that socialism is the answer. And so it's not necessarily a successful novel, but in terms of leading to reforms, it was a really important piece of literature. It had people looking at this industry and the way capitalism drives workers in a way that America hadn't really examined that industry before, and so it did bring about some changes, which of course is one of the reasons why I think it's still considered a classic, even though it's not necessarily a great piece of fiction writing. Alright, so there you have it, Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. Definitely one you want to read when you want to be morbid and when you're tired of eating meat, because you won't want to eat meat after reading this book for a while. Looking ahead, starting 2019, our first book in January is going to be Stephen Crane's The Red Badge of Courage. If you don't know this one, it's a pretty brief novel set in the Civil War, and it's one of the most, some people call it the most accurate look at that kind of warfare ever written, which is kind of remarkable because Crane writes it when he's very young, and he was too young to have witnessed the Civil War. So this is completely a work of his own imagination and research, which makes the book a little bit more remarkable. So that's what we're going to be reading. My video review for The Red Badge of Courage will go up the last Sunday of January, and we'll go from there. I hope you're having a great week. Happy New Year to everybody. I'll see you again tomorrow with my BookTube birthday / 2019 goals, plans, whatever video. But I'll talk to you one more time before New Year's Eve. Bye, everybody.